Imagine a room beneath your house, carved into the earth, dark and cool. No electricity, no humming of a motor, just the soil itself, working silently, patiently. Once upon a time, for almost every American family, survival depended entirely on this small, humble space. Today, for most of us, preserving food is as simple as opening a refrigerator door. But for our grandparents, things were entirely different. Having a fresh potato, a carrot, or a jar of jam on the table in the dead of winter was the result of patient, hard work that started months in advance. At the heart of this struggle was a simple yet brilliantly designed space dug deep into the ground, the root cellar. Today, we're going to explore it together. We'll look at how it came to be, how it sustained families through brutal winters, and why, one day, it quietly vanished into history. If you still remember the unique, earthy smell of a cellar, a basement, or your grandmother's garden from your childhood, this story is just for you.
To truly understand the root cellar, we first have to imagine a world without refrigerators. This appliance, which we take for granted today, is actually a fairly recent invention. Electric refrigerators didn't become common in American homes until the mid-20th century. Before that, people had to find other ways to keep their food fresh, and that is where the earth comes in. When you step just a few feet below the surface, the temperature barely changes throughout the year. Even when the summer heat is scorching outside, a few feet underground remains consistently cool. In the winter, while the world above is freezing, the temperature below never drops to a freeze. For centuries, American farmers and families relied on this simple yet invaluable fact. The roots of the root cellar trace back to 17th century Europe, but this structure found its true purpose in the New World, right here in America. Especially in colonial New England, nearly every farmhouse had a root cellar. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, as the nation expanded westward, this tradition spread to every corner of America. Today we look back at this not just as a story of food storage, but as a story of how a family prepared for winter and how a community lived in perfect harmony with nature.
In 18th and 19th century America, autumn was the busiest season for a farm family. Harvests were gathered, fruits were picked, and vegetables were pulled from the earth. But for all this hard work to truly matter, these crops had to last through the winter. And that is exactly when the root cellar became a family's most valuable asset. Some root cellars were built directly into the main basement of the house. Others were entirely separate structures, dug into the side of a hill, reinforced with bricks, stones, or heavy logs. The smaller ones were just a few square feet. The larger ones, however, were true underground rooms, tall enough for a person to stand upright and stretching up to 20 feet long. The secret to a successful root cellar relied on four simple yet delicate balances. First was temperature. An ideal root cellar had to stay just above freezing, roughly 34 to 39 degrees Fahrenheit. This prevented freezing while slowing down decay. Second was humidity. The air inside had to stay quite damp because dry air would cause the vegetables to shrivel and wrinkle. That's why many root cellars kept dirt floors on purpose. The earth naturally held the moisture. Third was ventilation. Without proper airflow, mold and rot would spread rapidly. And fourth was darkness. Light would cause vegetables to sprout and lose their nutrients. Because of this, most root cellars were almost mysterious places, wrapped in total darkness, accessed only by a trapdoor or a heavy wooden frame. So, what went into a root cellar? Naturally, the root vegetables it was named after: potatoes, carrots, beets, turnips, and radishes. But the list didn't end there. Cabbages and squashes were also stored here. Some families kept baskets of apples in a corner, but you had to be careful. Apples naturally release a gas that causes other vegetables to ripen and rot much faster. Shelves were lined with jars of pickles, jams and preserves. Salted meats, salted fish, and sometimes even milk and butter were left here to stay cool. An abundant cellar in October was like a silent promise a family made to their children. We will not go hungry this winter. During the autumn months, the entire family took part in the preparation. Even the children learned how to pack potatoes into woven baskets and bury carrots deep into bins of damp sand, a method that kept them fresh for months. Corn was dried and hung from the ceiling. Dried beans were strung up in long lines. When we picture these scenes, we aren't just looking at food storage. We are looking at a family working as one. We see patience, hard work, and knowledge passed down through generations. The root cellar served purposes far beyond storing food. On the American plains, sudden storms and tornadoes were a constant threat. In an era before early warning systems, a root cellar close to the house could save a family's life. When the sky turned black and the winds roared, the family would rush down into this cool, earth-scented shelter. During darker chapters of history, these cellars held an even deeper meaning. In the mid-19th century, for those escaping slavery, these hidden underground rooms offered a temporary refuge. Historians note that some root cellars were used as stops along the Underground Railroad. It shows how a simple storage space could play a powerful role in the story of human freedom.
While rural America relied on the earth, the cities were writing a very different story. In the early 19th century, a Boston merchant named Frederick Tudor came up with a wild idea: harvesting ice from frozen lakes and shipping it to distant ports. At first, people thought he was crazy, but Tudor discovered that large, solid blocks of ice melted much slower than smaller fragments. This breakthrough gave birth to a massive ice trade industry. By the mid-19th century, strange-looking zinc-lined wooden boxes began appearing in city kitchens. The ice box. A block of ice was placed in the top compartment while food sat below. As the ice melted, the water drained into a pan underneath, which had to be emptied every single day. An ice block usually lasted just a day or two. Because of this, icemen drove their horse-drawn wagons through neighborhoods, delivering fresh ice straight to people's doors. By the turn of the century, nearly half of all American homes owned an icebox. In the early 20th century, scientists began developing electric refrigeration, but this technology didn't enter homes right away. It started in large commercial meatpacking plants and breweries. Electric home refrigerators only began trickling into American kitchens during the 1920s and 30s. This shift didn't happen overnight. The Great Depression and World War II forced many families back to the old ways. During the war years, when resources were scarce, government agencies launched campaigns encouraging American families to use and even build root cellars. Waste nothing was the motto of the era. But when the war ended, America changed rapidly. Electricity finally reached rural areas. Factories shifted their massive wartime production toward home appliances. Electric refrigerators became cheaper, more reliable, and widely available. By the mid-20th century, the refrigerator had officially conquered the American kitchen. This shift brought an end to the root cellar, not suddenly, but slowly. Some families kept using their old cellars for long-lasting crops like potatoes and apples, but a family's survival no longer depended on that small dirt room. Over time, new homes were built without root cellars. The ones in old farmhouses became forgotten, dusty corners. Some turned into regular storage. Others became dusty playgrounds where children looked for adventure. Today, in historic farmhouses and living history museums, some of those old root cellars still stand. When visitors step into that cool, earthy air, they take a short journey back in time. There, the empty jars on the shelves and the tracks on the dirt floor remain silent witnesses to the hands that built them and the families they kept alive.
Perhaps you too remember walking down the steps in your grandmother's house, stepping into that cool, dark room. Maybe you can still recall the smell of the fresh earth, the rows of jars on the shelves, and the burlap sacks of potatoes resting in the corner. In those days, we thought it was just an ordinary room. But today we realize that that room was a silent hero, carrying an entire family through the winter, and sometimes keeping them alive. The root cellar tells us a story that goes far beyond storing food. It speaks of a time defined by patience, hard work, and community. Back then, people lived by the rhythm of nature. They gathered what the earth gave them, prepared for the winter, shared with their neighbors, and leaned on one another. The coldness we get today with the press of a button, they took from the earth itself through patience and hard labor. Perhaps today, no one truly needs a root cellar anymore, but the warmth of those old days and the joy of families working together is something we still carry deep inside us. And perhaps, while listening to this story, you found yourself journeying back to the unforgettable sense of your own childhood and to those quiet yet priceless memories.